will be in the shadow of the service module. These three astronauts, as we have noted throughout, have handled themselves perfectly and handled the problems perfectly so far. What kind of men are they, really? David Shoemaker can tell us more about them. David?
The crew used to joke about Apollo 13, the unlucky number. Jim Lovell, the commander, is anything but superstitious. Fred Hayes, the lunar module pilot, said he wished they could launch on a Friday the 13th. But when Ken Mattingly was bumped, the laughter turned a little bitter, and the new member of the crew, Jack Swigert, was much too busy for jokes. Like Mattingly, Swigert is a bachelor whose life has revolved around flying since he was a youngster. He delivered papers to earn money for his flying lessons. As an astronaut, Swigert has been more serious than in his college days at the University of Colorado, when everyone called him Big Swig, and he was president of his fraternity. In the 2 days before his flight, Swigert took the toughest hazing of his life, proving to a frankly skeptical Jim Lovell that he was ready. It came so fast he didn't even have time to call his family back in Denver. His mother learned the news from a CBS reporter, said only recently her son had told her not to worry. There was no chance he would be substituted in the last 2 weeks before a mission. Jim Lovell resisted the change in his crew for understandable reasons, reasons that had nothing to do with Swigert personally. He had a good deal of pride in the two young rookies he had trained with so long. With more time in space than any other man, he knows just how much pressure is involved in a flight, and he likes things done without excitement. Lovell's easygoing manner has always been a delight to his coworkers, who quickly tire of prima donna pilots. Whether the complexity of a lunar landing mission or dealing with reporters, Lovell takes everything in stride.
You feel ready to land on the moon now?
I certainly do. I feel ready to land on the moon. Here, no problems about that.
Lovell jokes about a part-time job he holds, physical fitness consultant to the president. He says he qualified by doing nothing longer than any other astronaut, meaning his record 2-week endurance flight locked up inside Gemini 7. It is the time Lovell has been forced to spend away from his family, his 15-year-old son Jay calls him the traveling salesman, that prompted Lovell to announce that this would be his last flight. That, and a desire to open the way for younger astronauts.
Well, I personally think this flight is very special for me. I think it's an accumulation of the work that I have done in the space program. It's certainly utilizing the skills that I have learned since I've been here, and I think it has a lot to offer to the scientific community and the further exploration of our universe.
You didn't really have to stop flying, did you?
No, I made that announcement basically because we have a lot of people in our flight crew area that are well qualified that have not yet flown. And of course, suddenly now we're getting perhaps a reduction in the flights. And I feel that I've had more than my share of space flights, and I would like to step aside because I feel these people deserve an opportunity to do what I've done.
It was the astronaut class of 1966 that has been pressing hardest to do what Lovell has done, the class of Swigert, Mattingly, and Fred Hayes. The three men are much alike, serious, involved, and worried about measuring up. Hayes talked about it just before Ken Mattingly left the crew.
I kind of feel like I led 3 lives for the FBI at times with on the job plus being a father and having a family, and Ken doesn't have that time to really worry about that. He can put more in the mission. I kind of feel that this is certainly a big highlight. I've been directed toward this mission a long time, and I'd sure hate to feel that there was something that went wrong or I didn't do right. I wouldn't want to have it on my conscience that it was due to something I didn't do to prepare.
Unlike Lovell, Swigert, and Mattingly, Hayes didn't always intend to be a pilot. That came later in the Navy in order to get a commission, he admits. Until then, he thought he would be a journalist and worked off and on for the newspaper in his hometown, Biloxi, Mississippi. But the demands and discipline of test flying won him over, and he has been a perfectionist in learning about the lunar module and the geology work required once he gets out on the moon's surface with Lovell. For a time, when Mike Collins became ill, Hayes was slated to make the historic mission of Apollo 11, the first landing on the moon. When Collins recovered, Hayes slid back into his present position with a minimum of fuss. And then came Apollo 13, and still another crew shakeup. A demanding test, even for men used to the pressure cooker existence of astronauts, Lovell and Hayes and Swigert. This is David Shoemaker.
And that is Mission Control in Houston. And this is Walter Cronkite at the CBS News Space Center in New York, where with Wally Schirra and Leo Krupp, we have been reporting the events of Apollo 13 through this night. The story, as we have told you, is that Apollo 13 was in some trouble, or is in some trouble, because of an explosion, cause unknown, that knocked out the electrical power system for the command module and the service propulsion system engine. They've had to use the descent propulsion system of the lunar module to put them into a return trajectory, to bring them back to Earth after a half circle of the moon tomorrow night. That firing has taken place of the descent propulsion system engine. It has gone successfully as far as we know. We know the firing went successfully on precisely the timeline that had been outlined for it to increase the speed just 14.5 miles an hour, which is enough to do the job. What we have not had confirmed yet, and probably will not for some time until a lot of radar tracking has taken place, is that it is on exactly the right trajectory. But we will be getting that eventually this morning. The astronauts are in good shape and good spirits, acting like good pilots and test pilots, doing their job up there, as here on the ground in Houston at Mission Control they have been doing theirs to solve the problems and to bring the Apollo 13 safely home. In their homes in Houston, Mrs. Hayes and Mrs. Lovell have been keeping themselves advised of the progress of the flight. They admit concern, of course, but there has been no dramatics at either home. We have been told by NASA, and as wives of these pilots know by now, they know the problems and the mission, and they're not likely to be more concerned than that. The story is told to us by Pete Conrad, who was at the Lovell home, was that Mrs. Lovell is pretty calm but tense, he said, as he left the home on his motorcycle not too long ago. In answer to another question of newsmen, he said, sure, they'll make it. Of course, it's always a shame to give up a mission. And Marilyn Lovell told newsmen also, I'm not saying another word until Jim gets back home. A spokesman at the Houston Space Center said of the firing of the descent propulsion system engine, it was a good burn, and now the trajectory is what needs to be checked out. The voyage back, the Aquarius is being used now as a lifeboat. And strangely enough, that's the word that actually the astronauts and Mission Control used to describe it, is a lifeboat. And it really is that. It's a bailout procedure.
Well put. I just overheard one remark. The Mission Control Center advised the crew to do just what we were talking about, and that is to have one man on watch all the time. And they're about to pass up some of the equipment from the command module to support that man on watch in the limb. So these things are falling into place. I think you'll find that with this time we have, that we'll see each thing phased in properly so that we won't have to worry about it. I don't think there's any sense in... We can't wring our hands and help, I know that.
We got more men on watch here at CBS News Space Center than they have up there at Apollo 13. We got all three of us still up and in the command module. Did they say anything, because I missed that transmission, did they say anything, Wally, about a sleep schedule? Who is going to sleep, and are they going to sleep up in the command module now?
Well, not particularly. They didn't mention by name, but they did make it quite clear that one man would stay awake, and that, of course, is what I was suggesting earlier. The other thing that is of interest, I think, is that their attitude control system, the attitude reference system, will probably stay powered up. even though that may eat into their energy, the total electrical energy. It's probably going to be less than restoring their attitude if they can't find it. And one of the sad cases, they said, and there'll be no urine dumps. We suggest you not have those for a while, so they're going to be storing urine in whatever kind of bags they can find on board.
I think there's two reasons for that, Wally, is every time they do a dump, they lose a little bit of oxygen because they are venting to the outside. So they're probably doing that to reduce the outside contamination, also to conserve the oxygen inside.
Well, that's quite true, yeah, because although you don't really use that much to dump it, but sure as heck there's a lot of, they don't want to add to the debris outside.
That's right.
That is a problem. The particles that are already there from the mishap, plus whatever dumps they make star sightings even that much more difficult.
You know, they should be in a rest period right now. They're 1 hour beyond the scheduled rest period, in which all three of them would have been resting.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever new watch on and off they're establishing for this new procedure, one fellow is going to miss a sleep period here for a while, and they're all an hour behind on the previous of the scheduled rest period. But they got a good night's sleep last night. It was a 10-hour rest period, and presumably they all got a good sleep, as we understand it. So they're, I suppose, not suffering any from lack of sleep at this moment. But they are going to have to get back on a schedule pretty quickly, and I guess that means that two of them probably are getting up in that command module right now and getting ready for this rest period. Now, they undoubtedly missed a meal period that was just going to precede that rest period. So that's going to delay them further if they're going to have a midnight snack here before they doze off.
I think the flight plan's pretty much out the window right now, Walter, and they'll probably play it by ear until they get things organized, at least get around the moon and get started back.
Very good. One of the things that we've seen, of course, now, and it's become almost traditional, is to show mission control, the control center room where the flight controllers themselves are. But there are, I'd say 10 times that many people around that room in support rooms. And one room is involved with flight planning, another room is involved with technical aspect, we'll say, of the LEM attitude control system. There are probably about, I would guess, probably 1,000 people working directly right now on each facet of this mission. And some are working up flight plans, others are working up what stars to look at for sightings. So it would be kind of interesting to show those other rooms, but we can't do that, of course.
And then, of course, beyond those rooms, we've got the simulator. And I was told that Ken Mattingly has just gotten back from the simulator and has re-entered the mission control. Another thing that might be pointed out is at those consoles, what goes on at those consoles that we see on the pictures. And as I gather it, that each of the consoles is an expert in just one aspect of the flight. And he's monitoring up there on the big board those figures which are directly concerned with his aspect only. And that's what that bank of people is.
Well, that's part of it. And he also has a TV set in front of him about this square. It's a closed circuit system where he can call up graphs, charts, plotting boards, the same ones you see in that large screen. Call up any bit of information he needs, old information, new information, or present, so that he can literally update himself through this contrivance. And that's really where you put the computer world to work for yourself. And that's just about what the space program is. It by no means invented the computer, but it sure learned how to use it.
You know, I suppose, I ought to mention this maybe, I suppose that throughout tonight, in these 6 hours and 15 minutes since we first got the bulletin that there was trouble up there, I suppose it flashed through people's minds all of the kind of space movies they've seen, space fiction they've seen. The most recent, Marooned, which is the first one involving an Apollo spacecraft, and is built on the story of an Apollo spacecraft that could not fire its engines to bring it into a safe trajectory, and was caught out in space. We don't have anything like this kind of a drama going on, and if anybody's got that impression, simply by what has been said so far tonight, they've gotten the wrong impression.
Very good.
There's nothing even remotely similar to that as yet, and there's no indication there's going to be. What has happened is that we have lost a primary system of propulsion, and we've gone to a secondary system of propulsion in order to safely return the guys from the moon. We have lost, by the failure that has caused the loss of the primary system of propulsion, the capability of going to the moon's surface. But the capability of returning is still there. At this moment, if everything continues to function as it is, there's plenty of oxygen on board. Nobody's up there breathing heavily at the moment. There's plenty of water aboard. There's plenty of battery power to fire those engines which are required for a safe landing. And that's where this mission stands at the moment.
As a matter of fact, Walter, even in the pre-flight planning for this mission, we've always had it in the mission plan that if, for any reason, the surface propulsion system could not be fired to put the vehicle into lunar orbit after they got off of their free return trajectory, you would use the descent propulsion stage to do this. So really what the NASA is doing is following their pre-flight plan. The only variation is that the surface propulsion system really hasn't failed. What has failed is the electrical system, which prevents us from using the SPS engine. But the NASA is actually following their pre-flight plan, which is to use the descent propulsion stage engine of the LEM to back up in case of a SPS failure, to put the vehicle back on a free return.
Of course, it was not calculated in that plan that the cause of the SPS failure would be a total lack of power.
That's right.
In the command module.
And this has created some other problems, such as conserving the electrical power. But as far as getting the vehicle back on a safe trajectory back to Earth, this was all pre-planned by the NASA, and they're following their pre-flight plan.
Well, this gets back to that basic philosophy. We felt we had to have a backup to this one engine up here. Well, we do in this sense. We have it down here. In Earth orbit, we didn't have that available on Apollo 7.
That's right.
We worked out a technique where we could take the command module by itself and oscillate it back and forth on its attitude thrusters, decelerate it in Earth orbit, and re-enter, which of course isn't a practical maneuver for a lunar flight, but it just shows how far we'll dig into the systems to find an escape route, really.
Pilots, being basically cowards, always try to figure out another way to get home in case the primary way fails.
Very good.
We're beginning to get the trajectory defined now, the one we've been waiting for, to be sure that the burn was in the proper direction. And Mission Control has advised Aquarius that it has a 155 statute mile paracynthion. Paracynthion is a low point around the moon. Apocynthion is the high point of a moon orbit. Whether that is the proper low point for this free return trajectory, I don't know yet.
I think that's pretty close. I heard before they said that the paracynthion would not be less than 125 miles, so they evidently came fairly close to what they were predicting.
Good.
So 155, if not less than 125, then 155 ought to be enough to assure a free return trajectory.
Well,
right?
that gives them a safe hook around the moon. Now, there may have to be a fine alignment on the way home. Another
mid-course burn, yes.
To get us back into the right entry angle into the Earth's atmosphere.
And that'll again be performed by the descent propulsion system engine, and that is the burn that they could determine whether they save 9 hours on the flight and come down the Atlantic or go into the Pacific landing spot. Is that right?
Very good.
All right. Glad that I'm accepted and approved.
Well, at least we're not going to argue with you on that.
I must say, there was a lot, there was a time when it was a lot easier to report space. And I'll tell you when that time was. It was before you came along, Wally. That time was when I could say almost anything around here, and if I knew I was wrong, I mean, if I thought that if I was doubtful about it, I knew it was going to take a while before I found out. Now all I got to do is look over at you, and if I get that skeptical eyebrow raised, I hold my breath to find out. And Leo is in the same category. Of course, Leo normally doesn't sit up here with me. He sits out with Bill Stout in that command module, dressed up in the flying suit and explaining what's happening in the command module, but I'm particularly honored to have you with us tonight, Leo, as we go through these very technical matters which have to be brought down to size for us laymen, and that you and Wally both do so beautifully. Leo, how long have you been with us now? How many missions? Was it all through? It was all through Gemini?
No, sir.
No,
I started with you.
Apollo. Start with Apollo.
Apollo 8
That's
was
right.
the first one I was with you.
Yeah. But, gosh, it's
I
been
missed
marvelous.
Wally's flight.
That was
And,
too easy for you.
Good one to miss. You'd have been flying around that simulated cockpit out there, that spaceship out at Downey, getting the engine shut down.
Yes.
Oh, that was Gemini, wasn't it? I forget. Bill Stout, who normally teams up with Leo in the North American Rockwell Command module, is now with Scott McLeod in our lunar module out at Grumman Aircraft in Bethpage, Long Island. Bill?
Yeah, Walter, I feel a bit out of place, but I imagine those men up there do too, with all that crawling back and forth that wasn't in the schedule for this time of the trip. Scott, what is it that they have to do now? We hear about checking and shutting down, but exactly what does all that mean back here?
Well, Bill, I guess what they're doing is powering down everything that's not required, all their comm systems, except as required to communicate back to Earth. They're trying to cut down on any drain on any system whatsoever and just exist quietly until they go around the other side.
This has to be their floating and tacked-on power plant and air supply and everything else for the rest of the trip, in effect.
Yes, yeah.
Is it terribly complicated back here? The indications from Houston are that one man, one of the three, will have to stay for most of the trip back and stay awake and keep his eye on everything and make sure that everything keeps functioning as efficiently and with as little power drain as possible. Is that going to be tough for one man alone? It's supposed to be a two-man job.
Well, it's designed, I think, in fact, it is designed so one man can handle it, much like many multi-engine aircraft that have two pilots but are designed basically for one man. So I don't think it's a rough job for one man in this powered down state. They're not making a landing, they're not separating, it's just monitoring the systems.
It's terribly complicated. You say just monitoring. How many circuits or switches or components, however you measure these things, how many are there back here that the one man is going to have to keep track of?
If you give me time, I could count them, but I don't know offhand.
Offhand? Certainly dozens, hundreds, I would imagine, when we get through looking at all of them. And he's going to have to make sure that everything works so that they have the maximum output from this when they need it.
Yes, but much the same as the command module, which you're fairly familiar with, we have a caution and warning system located up across the top there that will light up with any problems that occur, and then procedures have already been explained and are written down as to what he would do if a small problem did arise.
Is this sort of one-man operation that is now required written into the training? Is it one of the contingencies that everyone who works in the lunar module is supposed to expect just in case?
Yes, everything has been considered prior to the flight, and they are, as Walter pointed out, and everyone else there, just proceeding as previously planned in case of this particular contingency.
Walter, I don't know what you have in mind looking around this vehicle, but it certainly looks to me like something pretty complicated for two men, much less one. But then I'm a stranger here. Scott and Nelson Benton usually occupy this part of our operation.
We're pleased to have Scott with us for this midnight ride of Apollo 13 through the night. Thank you, Scott, for your diligence, devotion to duty out there, and don't go away. We've got more to do. Certainly that is a complicated machine, as you say, Bill, and it was never thought, I don't think. Well, that's not correct. It was thought that it might be needed in this capacity. It is now functioning as, but certainly it wasn't its prime function. It was meant to get down there on the moon's surface, and it's too bad that the LEM named Aquarius, Apollo 13, isn't going to get to play that part of the mission, but it's playing a more important one now in getting the guys home safely. You know, we've been talking about free return trajectory here during this night and just what it means. The first 3 Apollos that went to the moon went out there on a free return trajectory. That is, from the time that they went in to trans-lunar flight on the way to the moon. Once they were boosted there by the S-4B with a couple of minor mid-course corrections, they were on a course that would take them out around the moon and right back to Earth. The moon's gravity catching them and giving them a slingshot effect, and the speed was so balanced that they would swing around and be thrown right back toward the Earth. But then on Apollo 12, something new was tried, a hybrid trajectory it was called. And that meant a trajectory which would not be a free return. It meant that they would be swung around the moon all right, but when they were swung back toward Earth, they would miss the Earth by some 50,000 miles, would not come back to the Earth's atmosphere for a landing. This hybrid trajectory was felt was safe because the very thing that happened tonight. If anything went wrong and they could not use the Service Propulsion System engine to bring them back, they had the lunar module engine to do the job. That's what they're having to do, is to now get to drop the hybrid trajectory and go back to the free return trajectory. They have done that by firing the Descent Propulsion System engine, and we have every assurance from Houston that they're on the proper course and the speed now to make a free return trajectory. In the free return trajectory system, in making a moon orbit, the spacecraft was slowed down as it got into that moon swing. In the boomerang approach, it was slowed down enough so it was captured by the moon's gravity, and with its own speed as a centrifugal force, balanced even as in Earth orbit the spacecrafts have in the past around the moon and stayed in a moon orbit. Without firing that engine to slow down, it would be coming back to Earth. That's the free return trajectory, the hybrid trajectory, and now in this case of Apollo 13, back to the free return trajectory. Bruce Morton is standing by at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. Bruce?
Staying with the Lovels, who reports that the 3 children who are living at home are all asleep by now. The 2 youngest went to sleep before they really knew there was any trouble. The older girl, who's 16, of course, did stay up through the first part of it, but she is now asleep. Mrs. Lovell is watching you, as a matter of fact, Walter, we're told, with one friend, Adeline Hammock, described as one of the family's best friends. Mrs. Hammock's husband is in charge of the recovery operation, and he's spending, as you can imagine, a busy morning in mission control. We've had a little new information here filtering through from the fog outside that has crept in around the Manned Spacecraft Center. A little new information on the landing sites. If they come down in the Atlantic, the coordinates we were given at the news conference were about 20 to 25 degrees south, 25 to 30 degrees west. And that works out to be off Brazil, about 1,500 miles due east from Sao Paulo. The Pacific site would put the splashdown about midway between Fiji and Tahiti, which is some distance, a good 2 or 3 days steaming, I would think, from where the carrier Iwo Jima is now. Might also add we've gotten a new estimated time for the trans-Earth injection, the one remaining large burn that Apollo 13 wants to do to accelerate its progress back toward Earth. We had been told that would come around 9 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow evening. The new word is around 6 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow evening. But as you know from earlier flights, those times tend to bounce back and forth a good bit as the trackers refine their information as to just where the spacecraft is and just what its course is. There's a feeling it seems to me, in the commentary from Mission Control, I obviously haven't been inside the room, of growing confidence. The first burn has gone well. They were confident enough to turn off a number of the systems, to quit radio communication for 5 minutes. And more and more, there's the feeling that Chris Kraft expressed earlier at the news conference that Although it's an emergency, and although it's serious, it's under control, and as long as things stay the way they are, it's going to work out all right. Walter?
Everybody has that hope, and nearly as I can tell, everybody has that expectation. Now here's Roy Neal in Mission Control.
It's beginning to stabilize. At the moment, the flight directors are still working with the various support rooms and with the controllers here in Mission Control as they determine best how to allow some sleep time, some rest time for the astronauts of Apollo 13. The plan being at the moment to power down the LEM guidance computer. As a matter of fact, they plan to power down all non-essential power systems on board to conserve power as much as possible, and then using manual control to begin to slowly spin the spacecraft so that the astronauts will remain in a reasonably comfortable situation for a rest period. They also plan to have one of the three astronauts, which one we don't know yet, remain awake, a sort of watch operation as the spacecraft proceeds slowly. We don't know exactly what time the astronauts will be put to sleep or for how long. This too is being worked out. We do know, however, that the free return burn, as they call it, was nearly perfect, as near perfect as anything that could have been done. So the spacecraft, at its closest point of approach to the lunar surface, will be a little more than 136 miles out, and we still expect another burn to be made at approximately 79 hours ground elapsed time, which will bring them home considerably earlier. So, Mission Control then, steadying down, stabilizing, same aboard the spacecraft. Roy Neal in Mission Control.
So there is a even new confidence, if that is a proper phrase, in Mission Control now that that burn has gone so well, and the mission seems to be going along the nominal line for an emergency mission, for the backup mission, backup return through the use of the lunar module. The firing went well, and apparently the trajectory is good. So now it's just a matter of setting it out, really, of waiting to be sure that all of the environment support, the life support system of the lunar module and of the command module continue to function well. It is still a tricky matter because the backup facility is gone. We're using backup facility. The command service modules, fuel cells are out. There is no power being generated by those. They're using the lunar module's batteries to recirculate the air through the lithium hydroxide containers, and there is plenty of oxygen aboard, but of course with only that system left to do the job, everybody's got their fingers crossed that nothing else goes wrong. So far it looks good.
I think one of the remarks that Bruce Morton made is worthwhile correcting, and that is that initially there was a large burn to be made about 9 p.m., I believe it was, Eastern Standard Time. That was before the so-called tweak burn of some 16 feet per second was made at 3:42, so that the trajectory will be tailored by that burn to another burn schedule. So we'll be hearing more, I suspect, on when they want to make this next burn to give us the exact locale for landing.
I think they said, Wally, they'd make the second burn at 79 hours, and this will be after they hook around the moon, and this will be another increase in delta V, which will cut down the transit time back to Earth. And I think I heard it, I'm not sure which circuit I heard it on, but they said the second burn would be at about 79 hours in the middle.
And we're now 48, 58, and 4 is 62 hours into the mission. So that's what, another 17 hours before they would be doing that.
See, the normal LOI burn was at 77 hours, so 79 hours would mean that they have taken their hook around the moon and they're starting their coast back toward Earth when they'll do the second burn, which will probably be an acceleration burn.
Just speed them up.
To cut down the transit time, to increase the speed so that their time back to Earth will be minimized.
Actually, that return trip, since the hook around comes at around 9:30 tonight, that will be, oh, tomorrow night, 9:30 tomorrow night. No, tonight, Tuesday night.
Tuesday night, this should be going around the moon.
Yeah, wow. At any rate, when they make that hook around at 9:30 tonight, Tuesday night, Eastern Standard Time. In fact, it's Tuesday night, almost anybody's time, except across the date line, but we won't get into all that mess. They are on a safe trajectory. They're coming home. That's been done. Now it's only a matter of time. Once they make that hook around and are speeded up, they'll make it to the Pacific by 12:13 p.m., right after noon, Eastern Standard Time on Friday, according to the present plan. Now, if they get into problems and they want to cut down the use of the consumables even more, they give that an added burst. They get back 9 hours earlier even, which would be 3-something in the morning, 3:13 in the morning to be precise, and would land in that case in the Atlantic.
Well, that's another point. We have had night landings. We were trained for that. In fact, Apollo 8, the second Apollo flight, that did go around the moon, landed at night. Of course, that was in the Pacific. I believe it was about an hour before sunrise. So these are not variables that we're not prepared to meet. A night landing should not be a real hazard.
I'm curious to know what the Russians are saying right now about our flight and the problems of Apollo 13. I would imagine it's straight away 2 or 3 paragraph report, which is the way they have been reporting our missions, straightforwardly, but without very graphic number of details or number of graphic details. It's now mid-morning over there, and we should be hearing something if they could move fast enough and toss and Pravda, Spestia, to get something in the papers. I suppose the whole world is watching what during the night became a drama before the problem seemed to be fairly well worked out, and we ought to be hearing later in the morning from those points around the world. You know, it just occurred to me as I was looking up something on Fred Hayes there a minute ago that this is a flight of juniors, really. Lovell talked about it being the reason for Aquarius as an indication of youth and moving forward youth. Well, it is that. Lovell himself is 42, although the most experienced of the space flyers, but the others are all in their 30s. Capcoms and the men at the Flight Control Center in Houston are all in their 30s, and many of them in their low 30s. And just to sort of prove the point, every one of the 3 fellows aboard Apollo 13 is a junior. You realize that?
No, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert are all juniors. As a matter of fact, if Mattingly had gone, he was a 3rd. But they've now made it all juniors for the entire team. Speaking of the Russians and what they must be thinking about this operation today, we still, no matter, I can't really say no matter what the delay in our space program that might be occasioned by the study of what has happened to Apollo 13 before we go again, whether we get delayed or don't get delayed in further flights, we are so darn far ahead of the Russians right now in manned flight and moon exploration that we don't really have to worry, I don't think, about that phase of the space race any longer. They really bowed out of this moon race when, I guess, really when they saw they were licked, because they hadn't admitted it until that time. They may have stopped earlier. There were some indications, you know, that Khrushchev, even as early as that, back in the early 60s, had decided that the financial drain just wouldn't support the moon flights. But we don't know that to be so. We do know that after we got Apollo 8 around the moon and got Apollo 11 on the moon, that the Soviets claimed that they weren't going for lunar exploration any longer, but were going instead for the big space station. And I suppose that this is a phase in which they might still beat us. They have had the triple flights of Soyuz 6, 7, and 8, which didn't work as far as the link-up goes, but proved their capability of getting 3 spacecraft into orbit simultaneously. And it is an area that it looks as if they have might be a little bit ahead of us on. Do you agree with that, Warren?
Well, I see at least that they have 3 launch pads near each other. I concede that point just from the performance. Now, I don't think we've ever tried to gear ourselves up to use the same launch pad in that rapid order of a sequence. This is not a bad capability. It's quite a good capability. It's very expensive to have that many launch pads on the line. We have 2 large Apollo pads that can be used, and we have the old S-1B pad. So we feasibly could set up 3 missions that could launch almost simultaneously, or at least within hours of each other. It really turns out you have to launch about an hour and a half apart if you want to rendezvous in Earth orbit, because one must come over the horizon as you launch the second to economize on the amount of energy used to effect a rendezvous. That technique, they have demonstrated, we're aware of that. They've had automatic rendezvous, in fact. The only thing that bothers me a little bit is the fact, with the result of their automatic rendezvous, if they have some problems, they don't seem to have the capability of taking over and solving it. And this is a classic example of the mission we're watching right now, where they have problems and the crew is taking over, and in essence is solving it. I'm not sure what would happen with an automatic mission in that sense. I know what would happen, frankly.
Yeah.
Total disaster.
Well, this is really tying in with our advanced computer technology, along with our space technology. Really, when we talk about the space age, we're talking in a way about the computer age. I'm not taking anything away from you fellows who do the flying, but a lot of the advanced orbital mechanics has to be worked out.
Oh, it's all on the computer. You're right. In fact, I don't think any of us will ever argue that point. Without the computer, we couldn't have embarked upon the space age. The only classic statement I would make is that we learn how to use it efficiently and not to let it tell us what to do. Use it as a tool, which is what it is.
The Soviets have not, of course, done anything like what we've done in rendezvous at all. I mean, their rendezvous still seems to be in a very experimental stage. They haven't used it, practically done anything with it, as far as we know.
Well, it's kind of satisfying to me, because when we first picked up the task of the rendezvous mission with Gemini 6, there were really only about 4 or 5 people in the whole manned space program of the United States that were working on that, and the 2 of us were Tom Stafford and myself, and at that time Gus Grissom and John Young were backing us up. And we had about 2 more people, one in Houston and one in McDonald, where we had devised this technique. The principles of rendezvous were known long ago from the Hohmann transfer and the Keplean theories and other mathematical terms. But the technique that could be used by a crew to implement this rendezvous maneuver through a computer, and then in turn, if any malfunctions occurred, take over from any point in time and then complete the rendezvous. This is what we were perfecting.
I can tell you that you gave us fellows who flunked first-year physics in high school an awful hard time with rendezvous. That took a lot of study, a lot of homework to understand how you speed up to slow down and slow down to speed up and go higher to go lower,
slow down
and
to
lower
catch
to go
up.
higher. And,
you know, the most frustrating thing, though, is that this computer in Gemini, there was no way to add 1 and 1 and get 2. That function wasn't available to us, so we had to get down to some rather complicated terms to get our answers. Well, we didn't need to add 1 and 1. But oddly enough, if you accelerated about 1 foot per second, you would gain altitude of about 1 mile. And this was kind of a rough yardstick. I'm sorry, it was 2 miles. 1 foot was giving 2 miles. So you could get some little thumb rules that could help you. But the thing we really needed the most in rendezvous, and why we had so many crusades on the subject, was a way of measuring the distance between the 2 vehicles, the target vehicle and the vehicle that was overtaking. That's probably the most important bit of data that you use in a rendezvous, is judging range, and then, of course, with time you can get range, rate, or rate of closure, how fast you're closing on the other vehicle. And this is how we really have perfected the art of rendezvous.
Walter, getting back to your observations on the Soviet reactions possibly to this problem, I had the pleasure of escorting the 2 Russian cosmonauts around North America on their recent visit. And from a pilot standpoint, I know that they're probably following this very closely and probably pulling for the crew just like any pilot would. And one of the things that really impressed the Russian cosmonauts on our particular spacecraft compared to theirs was the fact that we did provide so many manual backup capabilities for the crew, that the crew had such a large latitude of authority where they could take over and fly the vehicle and do things with the spacecraft that was not tied to an automated system.
You know, there's certainly the Russian cosmonauts, the 2 who I have met, and some of the Russian space officials who have been over here who I've met and seen on the other side, and Russian politicians for that matter, ambassadors and so forth. There is a great community of interest, certainly, in going to space. It's one of the great things about this that, as Frank Borman's crew noted in getting out to the moon, that we realize that this is a pretty small spaceship we're all riding it together, and I suppose that lesson has not been lost on the Soviets. They all talk about the possibility of working together someday and going to space. Matter of fact, that movie Marooned,
yes.
You know, part of the rescue thing involved a Russian, and I saw the movie with some Russians who were officials who were terribly excited about the fact that a movie had been made showing the 2 nations working together out in space. We have the Russians did hear the news this morning, now advised by Moscow radio. They heard it just a couple of hours after the incident began, almost as soon as a lot of Americans, I suppose, did. The 140-word report that said the moon ship's main power installation went almost completely out of action because of an oxygen leak, they put it. Adding 2 astronauts transferred to the lunar module to switch on the power supply in the module. Certainly true. The 3 astronauts are in serious danger, they noted, and the flight controllers are taking all measures to return them to Earth safely. And that's the Moscow radio report. The mission has received only scant coverage in the Soviet Union so far, but it had the problem, I think, had a 2-paragraph report on the launching on Saturday. But these reports in the Russian press are usually pretty accurate. As I say, not overly long, but what they say is accurate. They say that they're in serious trouble. Well, in a broadcast 2 hours after the events at 12:04 a.m., they were in serious trouble. They hadn't yet been assured of the firing of the descent propulsion system engine. And I don't know. I'd like to know really how Chris Kraft assesses the situation right now. He said it was serious at about 1 o'clock this morning. I don't know what to say now. Let's listen to Mission Control for a while.
6 hours. You get up at 69 hours. At 70 hours, the commander and the command module pilot sleep for 6 hours until 76 hours. Around 76 and a half to 77 hours, we'll do a P-51 and a 52. At 78:30, we'll load P-30 and align eggs to pings. Our ignition time for a second burn will be presently 79, 25, 26.5, and we'll have a pad for you shortly. We suggest that all of you eat after the burn. That'll be 81 to 82 hours. That the CMP and CDR eat while you're sleeping. And that you grab a bite as soon as you can. Over. Okay, Jack, as I read that, the LMP is to go to sleep at 6300 for about 6 hours. During that period, the CDR and CMP should try to get a bite to eat. I'm going to wake at 69 hours. CDR and CMP sleep at 70 hours, and they're to wake at 76 hours. And we should plan on doing a P51, P52 at 76 hours to 76:30. At 78:30, we're going to load a P30 and a line of eggs to pig. Second maneuver is to take place at 79, 25, 26.5 ignition time. And then we're all to eat at 81 to 82 hours. Okay, with minor modifications, your P51, P52 will be about 77 hours. And that's a period of darkness. And the commander and the CMP ought to eat around 68 to 69 hours, and you should eat between 69 and 70 hours just after you get up. We have left an hour in there where everybody is awake together to talk things over. Go ahead. Okay, I'll eat after I wake up here between 69 and 70. All right, we have additional... And we got the correction to P... Go ahead, Fred. Yeah, we got the word to P51, P52. It's going to be done around 77 hours while we're in darkness. That's affirmative, and we have a work rest cycle laid out for further on, which we can relay to you later. Okay. Okay, and Houston, you have advice on what attitude you want me to go to? Okay, that'll be the next bit of information. I'll get that for you, Jim. Okay. And Aquarius, just to get you thinking in that direction, we've run a fairly thorough analysis, and we found out that it's going to be cheaper to keep the LGC and the Disky up and turn the inverter and the ball off. It's going to save us 1 amp and also some water. So it looks like that's what we're going to do.
And we'll have to monitor the middle gimbal angle, and we'll get the procedure on that. It'll also be an easier control mode where we'll be able to use the TTCA through the depth.
That sounds great, Jack.
We have been listening to a conversation between the Apollo 13 and Mission Control as they suggested a new flight plan for the remainder of this flight of Apollo 13, which no longer will be a moon landing mission, as we have known for some time now. It is a nominal flight plan, a plan that carries right on through with eat periods and sleep periods for the astronauts, and which includes the second burn of the Descent Propulsion System engine, which will, as we have pointed out here earlier, speed up their flight and speed up their trip home. The two possibilities for landings back on Earth, which are still available, are still being considered by Mission Control, and they will not make a decision on this until a little later, would bring them back either at 3:13 a.m. on Friday, or the other 9 hours later at 12:13 a.m., or p.m. rather, on Friday. Those are Eastern time. The night landing would be in the Atlantic, about 1,500 miles, 1,300 miles or so east of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the mid-afternoon splashdown would take place in the Pacific, roughly halfway between Tahiti and the Fiji Islands. Out in the Pacific, the aircraft carrier Iwo Jima is steaming and would be available to participate in the recovery as it had planned to do for the full 10-day mission, if that had taken place. In the Atlantic, there are no U.S. naval ships or apparently U.S. merchant marine ships in the immediate vicinity of that landing spot, but there are aircraft available, and ships undoubtedly could get there by Friday from somewhere and of some nation if that were decided upon as the landing spot. That would be the landing spot only if suddenly the consumables aboard the spacecraft, the oxygen primarily, was turned out to be in shorter supply than it is believed to be now, and they wanted to save an extra 9 hours in the flight time coming home. That doesn't look as if that will be any problem at the moment. The reports are that there is plenty of oxygen available in the lunar module and the command module for the long trip home. The spacecraft is still speeding toward the moon, now on a trajectory which will assure its return to Earth. It will be speeded up again with a firing of the engines tomorrow night, or tonight actually, Tuesday night, so that it will come home a little faster than it would otherwise. One of the world's foremost meteorite experts, in fact the word is meteoroticist, that's why I call him a meteor expert, said today that the blast that knocked out Apollo 13's electrical system well could have been caused by a small meteoroid, which is one of the theories. The other is that one of the bottles of high-pressure oxygen or hydrogen aboard might have exploded. Dr. Harvey Nenninger, the collector of the famed Nenninger collection of meteorites, said he could not prove his theory, but he told the United Press, "My opinion is that's what happened." Well, that's his opinion. Meanwhile, NASA will work on that telemeter data that it got back from the spacecraft and try to do its own figuring of what happened. Weight was added to that theory of Nenninger's by Jim McDivitt, who we heard at a news conference in the early hours this morning, and he has said that it was something that appeared to be quite violent that occurred in Bay 4 of the spaceship, of the service module. And if it were struck by a meteorite, he said that would be quite violent. I wouldn't say that's what happened, but we won't rule it out, said McDivitt. The astronauts, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, Jack Swigert, reported that they heard a loud bang at about 10 p.m., that they lost oxygen, they saw it venting immediately after that, and then the fuel cells and their electric generator equipment went out. Nenninger, incidentally, that meteorostasticist who has spent 40 years collecting meteorites, most of which he ultimately has sold to the space agency, he's 83 now, said that he has long feared that a manned spacecraft would be hit by a meteorite. He said we have pretty good evidence that at least one unmanned spacecraft, and he said he believed that it was one of the Mariners, was hit 2 or 3 times before it reached its destination. He said that the solar cells aboard the Mariner apparently were destroyed by the violent strikes. I hadn't heard that report before, but that's the report of Mr. Nenninger. We also have a report from aboard the USS Iwo Jima that there is a new little problem on the horizon. Captain Leland Kirkemo of the Apollo 13 recovery carrier, the helicopter ship Iwo Jima, says he's keeping an eye on a tropical storm, but he anticipates it will not give any problems should he have to pick up the crew Friday, 4 days earlier than scheduled. He's right now steaming 180 miles south-southeast of Pago Pago, or some 2,550 miles south of Hawaii. The tropical storm Helen is 330 miles southwest of Samoa and is moving in a southerly direction. The meteorologist aboard the Iwo Jima says he expects the storm to remain away from the splashdown point, which has not yet been determined. Well, that's one of the most interesting lines I've read off a piece of wire copy in quite a while. He doesn't expect the storm to remain, he expects the storm to remain away from the splashdown point, but he doesn't know where it's going to be yet. Well, there was a possibility that the aborted voyage would end in the Atlantic, this says, and if we haven't heard that now on CBS television more than 15 times tonight, I'd be surprised. We do repeat a lot of these things quite frequently for those of you who tune in late. It's not just built-in redundancy for any sort of safety feature from our Space Center here, but so that everybody does get a chance to get a full fill-in on what is going on with the flight of Apollo 13, which took a very dramatic turn at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time last night, when suddenly that explosion took place and the electrical power went out and all bets were off for a moon landing. Since then, Houston and the spacecraft itself has gotten squared away, fired off the descent propulsion system engine of the lunar module, and is now on a trajectory that will take it around the moon, headed back toward Earth for a landing here on Friday, probably Friday noon Eastern Standard Time, somewhere in the Pacific, out in the Pacific between the Fiji Islands and where else did I say earlier? Tahiti. Between the Fiji Islands and Tahiti. It's now 5:06 a.m. Eastern Time in the East. Well, the night has been long.
That's another redundant word, but I think we can say
and really, the reason that I mention that is because, quite frankly, I run out of almost anything else to say at this particular point. We have reported the problems aboard Apollo 13. It is now on the trajectory we have mentioned. The men are going to sleep. Two of them are going to sleep in the command module. The third will remain on duty in the lunar module to receive communications from Earth and to be sure that all power systems are operating properly for a smooth flow of oxygen they need, and that nothing comes on the line that uses up the power that they're going to need later on for another burn of the descent propulsion system engine, and then eventually for the re-entry controls of the command module itself. These are the only critical matters. As long as they have oxygen and water, which they have, and power to operate the control systems, they've got everything they need to get back, and power for communications, of course, as well. How do you feel about it now, Wally?
Well, I think it's obvious to all of us, Walter, and we're feeling it ourselves. The tense moments are diminished. The crew is resting easy. I believe it's Fred Hayes, in fact, who's going to go to sleep first. It was sort of casual conversation. There wasn't any of the crisp, alert conversation. It was really a case of documenting that, all right, now, gang, let's settle down for the pull. You're going to have a nice ride around the moon, and you can tell quite easily that all sides of the team are slowing. The adrenaline is no longer required. It's the logic that's prevailing, and the matter is still serious. I wouldn't want to diminish any of that. The choices are well defined now, and there is lots of time left once that burn was accomplished to raise the paracynthion up to, what was it, 155 miles. We know then that we've accelerated the vehicle enough to get back into the free trajectory around the moon back to the Earth. So with all this, the tension is diminished, and you and I are unwinding as well. Don't you feel somewhat that way yourself, Leo?
Yeah, I feel a lot better since we got that the burn off as well as I did. Once they're on the free return trajectory, a lot of the sweat is out of it. It's still going to be a long haul here to get them back, but barring any other problems, I think they're on the way.
I think one of the other consoling things I heard, which was really my major concern, I had no doubts that the descent engine would burn and do its job. I did have doubts, and I expressed those about maintaining their reference attitude. And it looks like there will be enough electrical energy to maintain that attitude by keeping up the gyro system, the simple way of saying it, throughout the return of the mission. So then they don't have to worry about the debris and the particles floating around it. They can check their star pattern by going on the backside of the moon where they are in the dark. And this is where they intend to do an alignment check. That's program 51 and program 52 are just that.
Which we heard them mentioning here
Right.
a few moments ago.
And so they're getting the data together for that. And when they do go around the back of the moon, they will be then eclipsed. The moon will eclipse the sun so that they can, in fact, see stars. And that's the time they'll recheck their alignment and then maintain that alignment of their initial reference system all the way back to Earth. So then everything is very easily predictable.
We didn't ever hear, I didn't hear, maybe you did, and if so, you could fill us in on it, what precisely they did in the matter of finally aligning the platform before the burn. That was the problem that we worried and sweated out with them there for an hour or so, and they couldn't
Well, apparently they had a backup alignment in the LEM from launch, which they maintained. And I wasn't sure of that, whether that was good enough or not. And apparently it was good enough, and as a result, the burn was accurate. We know that now.
Yeah.
With that, I'd say we're out of the woods. Just time is the only thing, and that happens to be our ally at this point.
They're on a trajectory that'll take them 155 miles from the moon at their lowest point. That's going to be a disappointment to Hayes and to Swigert particularly. That's the closest look they're going to get at the moon, 155 miles up. Hayes thought he was going to be walking on the moon by Thursday morning, and Swigert, who, as of last Thursday night, didn't know he was going to be making this trip at all, is a little closer than he thought he was going to be, up to Friday noon, and a lot less close than he thought he was going to be from Friday noon on, when he thought he'd be going to be down within 10 miles of the moon's surface as he swept down the drop-off of the lunar module.
You know, I believe they'll probably feel that much later than we have just felt that. Right now, they're fighting for their existence, in a sense. They've performed, and they're told to rest easy, but I'm sure they're still going to wonder about whether all this stuff works just the way they want it to. So their concern, their attention is going to be devoted quite seriously to accomplishing this mission that they've got now, which is an entirely new kind of mission, at least.
Bruce Morton has another report for us from the Manned Space Center in Houston.
Walter, I don't know how much you can see here, but outside our windows, the fog has at long last begun to lift, and you can see streetlights now. And the fog, in a sense, has lifted from this place in a more general way. Lights are still burning in both the wives' houses, Mary Hayes and Marilyn Lovell, but we're told that both ladies are quite calm. In Mission Control, where earlier there were ranks of 3 or 4 behind every console as people from all different shifts had come running in once they heard of the emergency, those ranks have thinned out now, and things are getting back to something at least closer to a normal business-like kind of basis. The astronauts, as you've heard, have been getting instructions about eating and sleeping and cycles and shifts, and it's all beginning to sound much more calm, much more controlled, much more ordinary than it did an hour or 2 ago. There are, of course, still some major decisions that NASA hasn't made yet, the biggest of those, I suppose, being which recovery area to go for, the Atlantic or the Pacific. The time of that TEI burn is back to around 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time tonight, or perhaps I just quoted it wrongly before. And I have one question for Wally Schirra, if he's still there. I'm always curious in situations like this, when the ground says to an astronaut, go to sleep now, can they?
That is kind of difficult, Bruce, to dial in sleep. Turns out I think at this point you'll find the crew is pretty tired. They were scheduled, I believe, just about an hour ago to sleep simultaneously. So with this bit of information, Fred Hayes apparently has been told to unwind and go to sleep. I'm sure it's going to be rather restless. I can recall looking down one time when Don Isley was told to go to sleep, and I turned over and looked at him, and he was looking right at me, so I'm sure he wasn't sleeping. And this was one of those more agonizing moments also. I think they'll unwind as we are, and I hope soon that we can try the same pattern ourselves.
How comfortable is it sleeping? Excuse me, Bruce, do you have something?
No, I was just going to say, I think if I were up there, I'd have a lingering desire to keep watching all those dials in the LEM somehow, just to know how things were going. Go ahead, Walter. I didn't.
No, that's fine. As a matter of fact, I was just about to interrupt you anyway because we've got another report coming from Mission Control, where we've got our own network correspondent now, Roy Neal.
Here in Mission Control, when Flight Director Glenn Lunny asked, after all this power down we're about to do, will we have enough to make it? The answer came back, yes, just barely. And that was really the conclusion to several hours of pressureful work after the fuel cells went out in the command module. The Mission Control room filled rapidly with astronauts and key NASA officials. Very shortly, Lovell and Hayes moved to the command module. Swigert, moved to the lunar module. Swigert remained in the command module. Here in Houston at the Manned Spacecraft Center, other astronauts took their places in a simulator and began to duplicate the situation as closely as possible here on the ground. By now, the situation can best be described as stabilized. At this time, the spacecraft is on what they call a free return trajectory. If nothing else is done, it will still return to Earth. And the big question, of course, was one of, would there be power enough to keep on going? We know now that there should be. A schedule's been worked out. At this hour, we expect that the lunar module pilot, Fred Hayes, is getting some rest, about 6 hours of rest, while in the lunar module, Jim Lovell remains awake, and in the command module, Jack Swigert remains awake. They'll get their rest about 6 hours from now. And after that, the schedule calls for a rotation period and finally another burn, which should speed them on their way back to Earth. We don't as yet have a firm time as far as their landing, their splashdown. Those details are still being worked on here in Mission Control. And a number of the management executives are still here. Jim McDivitt of the Apollo Program Office is here. Gene Kratz, another of the flight directors, currently sitting in the mission director's position. Deke Slayton of the astronauts office. And Glenn Lunny, still holding down his post as the night wears on. A long and pressureful nights in Mission Control. Roy Neal in Mission Control.
I was about to ask you, Wally, before Roy Neal came up there, what it's like sleeping in a weightless environment. Is it more difficult or is it easier than it is on Earth?
I found on Gemini 6 we were only up about 25 hours, and I slept from exhaustion. You know, on Apollo 7 we were up for almost 11 days. The first night, none of us slept well. We were most anxious about whether this vehicle would last. If you recall, we followed where we lost 3 of our crewmen, so we didn't have much confidence in it at that point. And then this grew. But it was then, I think it was about the second or third night, we slept quite soundly. Then after that, having recharged our sleep batteries, if I can put it that way, it became more difficult to sleep.
Well, what about the effect of weightlessness on the comfort of sleeping?
Well, that was part of it. I for example, like to fluff up a pillow and put it under my left ear. That's my favorite sleep mode on my side, although I find when I sleep on my back. We had sleeping bags that we slept within, and I kept grabbing onto a strut or something, the Linus blanket complex. We have to hold on to something. I will not admit to having had a teddy bear up there. Whatever, there's a habit pattern you follow when you sleep. And here, if you hold on to nothing, there's nothing to hold on to. You don't need to hold on. So I eventually got to the point where I slept within the sleeping bag and floated around within it, and accepted the fact that's where I would be when I woke up, instead of worrying about drifting off.
I've always thought of Don Isley as a teddy bear.
Well, he slept up in the tunnel. It was rather odd. I saw him up there one night, and what's he doing up there? And of course, I even played up, and he curled up in a little crouch position. And I found that was a comfortable place for himself.
Well, in your weightless state, you've got restraining straps that keep you from floating up to the...
Well, this is why we use this sleeping bag. Actually, it wasn't for warmth, or just to keep you stable, so you wouldn't float around while someone else was trying to do something. There's nothing more awkward than seeing a body floating by while you're trying to do some particular task. So we just basically slept within a cocoon. The bag would be more like a cocoon. It's a very restful mode in that sense, because you don't need the typical 8 hours we have on the one gravity on Earth, because your body doesn't suffer from any weight. You don't feel any pressure points.
That's one of the points that some of the futurists, in considering the uses of space, have made about the ability to perhaps take take heart patients, certainly burn cases and other such things, out to space where weightlessness would apply, and give, in the case of the heart, give the heart a chance to really rest without having to pump against gravity and with these other problems, it might make quite a difference.
I think it will, and as soon as we perfect our systems a little bit more, I think this might be a good way. I think we've came close to having some cardiac arrests on this one now. But you're right, though. It will help a lot, and I think this is one of the great advantages that we can see when we get to the point where we can put numbers of people in Earth orbit. We can afford to take cardiovascular patients into Earth orbit and let them truly relax.
Kraft Eric has got a whole space hospital planned out there, you know. Of course, he planned on using spent Atlas as the basis for it, but it's been very deeply considered, I know, by people who, as I say, look at the future of space medicine, and it has a great potential.
What will have to happen, of course, to get into that mode is a very low acceleration to lift people into Earth orbit. The Saturn and the heavy payload, the Saturn V, the last phase of boosted flight is a very low acceleration. It's less than 1 gravity. And it's kind of fun because you can sit back and train for it and do just as you did in the simulator while lying on your back. It's even easier.
Yeah, but it certainly is true. We're probably not about to put a heart patient top of a Saturn V rocket. There's not much sense in getting him out to space at that point. No. Here's a progress report of our own. We're planning on leaving the air at 5:30 this morning Eastern Time. Of course, we will be standing by throughout the day, and the whole CBS Space Center, as it is at any time when men are in the air, will be active, operating, running. All of the folks will be here to come on the air at the moment that there's any need to do so. Let's review now, before we leave the air at 5:30, for any who might have tuned in late, and I mean quite late, or who have been waiting for an update on the mission as it has gone along, as to what did transpire. At 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, approximately, last night, there was an explosion of some nature in the service module. Let me see that docked configuration here. And this is what was going through space. The service module is this large portion here. The command module is the next portion here. And this is the lunar module. The top half of this is the ascent stage, which carries the men back off the surface of the moon. And the bottom half here is the descent stage, which lowers them to the moon once they have separated from the command service module. Now, in this service module, the explosion took place. Whatever happened, it could have been an explosion of some of the high-pressure tanks, of which there are many in here, or it might have been hit by a meteoroid. That's one of the suggestions. At any rate, an explosion. It knocked out the fuel cells. Electrical power is generated in the service module for the spaceship by fuel cells. Liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen mixed together, and the chemical reaction to that is the creation of electricity with a byproduct of water. Now, that power from those fuel cells is needed to fire this big 20,500-pound engine. It is that engine which is used once the spacecraft is in the orbit of the moon to blast out of the orbit of the moon and send the spaceship on the way back home. But it can't be fired if this electrical energy is not being produced in here. There just isn't enough in the batteries left in the service module and the command module to fire that engine. Well, the space people had planned for such an emergency. The plan was to use the descent propulsion system engine here at the bottom of the lunar module. That engine runs up to 9,850 pounds of thrust and is quite capable of doing the job, boosting the whole thing back into a course that would bring it back home safely. The only problem is, if you use the engine for that purpose, quite clearly you can't use it to go to the moon, because going to the moon means separating all of this, leaving the descent stage on the moon's surface, with the ascent stage only coming back. And the ascent stage engine is only around 1,000 pounds of thrust, and that's not enough to do the job of getting on the way back home. So you have to have the descent engine still intact, still tied in, still coupled like this with the command module and the service module. So the moon landing mission had to be scrubbed. That was the first determination that was made by Mission Control in Houston. That was scrubbed, and then the next thing was to set up the entire vehicle on the proper course, the proper trajectory, and with the decision as to how much of this engine needed to be burned to put the entire vehicle on a free return trajectory. In other words, when it got to the moon, it would already be in a trajectory that would take it around the moon and on the way back home. That maneuver was performed satisfactorily early this morning, and the 3 astronauts of Apollo 13 are in a trajectory now that will take them around the moon and bring them home to a splashdown in the Pacific at 12:13 p.m. on Friday, if they stick with the present plan, and it seems that they will. We also, we're now told that that splashdown at 1 p.m. On Friday, Eastern Standard Time, and I'll tell you why about that in just a moment. But everything else is functioning well in the spacecraft. There is not enough electrical power to pump all of that oxygen that would normally be created and pumped in the command module, but there is plenty in the lunar module, and so one of the astronauts is remaining there. They're shuttling back and forth between the command module and the lunar module. They do have, according to Mission Control in Houston, plenty of oxygen aboard to get home safely on Friday. They've got plenty of water, they've got food, and they've got enough energy to keep this spacecraft cool and at the right temperature, cool and warm, away from the heat of the sun or the cold of outer space. They're all right, in other words. They're all right for the mission home. That's being done with the batteries of the lunar module. We're saving the batteries left into the command module for the re-entry maneuvers to get safely into that narrow pattern that they must fly down for that safe landing back on Earth. Mission Control has just advised that the crew that the next burn will occur tonight at 9:40 p.m. Eastern Time. That's the next firing of the descent engine to speed up the spacecraft and hurry the return on home. And the splashdown now looks like it'll be around 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday. We could listen now to the conversation that first reported the difficulty aboard Apollo 13 around 10 o'clock last night.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. We've had a main B bus undervolt.
Roger, main B undervolt. Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
Okay, right now, Houston, the voltage is looking good. And we hit a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there. And as I recall, main B was the one that had a amp spike on it once before.
Roger, Fred.
In the interim here, we're starting to go ahead and button up the tunnel again.
Roger.
That jolt must have rocked the sensor on, see now in O2 quantity 2, it was oscillating down around 20 to 60%. Now it's full scale high again.
Roger.
And Houston, we had a restart on our computer. We had pink light and the restart reset.
Roger, restart and a ping's light. Restart on a ping and reset.
And I'm looking at our service module RTS helium 1. We have B as barber pole and D as barber pole. helium-2, B is bubble pole, and secondary propellant, so I have A and C bubble pole.
Blew those tanks out, too, huh?
That was the way Mission Control heard about the problem and the report that began the chain of reports and the chain of events which caused the scrubbing of the moon landing portion of the flight of Apollo 13 and has caused the emergency procedure which has already started the men on a path which will bring them back home a little after noon Eastern Standard Time on Friday. We've been reporting here from the CBS News Space Center with the help of Captain Wally Schirra and of Leo Krupp from North American Rockwell, our test astronaut engineer from that company who's helped us on all our Apollo flights, and Wally, veteran, only veteran of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, who's been helping us since we got Apollo 11 off the ground. Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Leo, for these reports. We will, of course, as we told you earlier, be standing by here at the CBS News Space Center to come back on the air at any moment that it should be dictated by circumstances with Apollo 13. And the next regular report on CBS will be the CBS Morning News with Joseph Benty at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, an hour and a half from now. Good morning.
This has been CBS News coverage of the flight of Apollo 13. Next Apollo update on the CBS Morning News with Joseph Benty. This is CBS.